Okay, we'll get started back. Call the meeting back to order. And next on the item under general record bookkeeping is use of generally accepted accounting principles. Jeff knows all about those. He might, I don't know if he wants to make a comment about it right quick, but I think most people understand what that is.
That's okay.
It says you keep your books in order.
All right.
I gotta agree with Don, that's a tough one to, I mean, all the money you get pretty much coming from the county, so.
Okay.
All right, fire incident investigative and, investigation reporting requirements.
Wouldn't that go into the other reporting requirements?
I would think so, yes.
Okay.
Just put Kevin there.
I guess we need to know what the requirements are.
What was it, monthly reporting on the new software system?
So that's just gonna move up there to that?
Yeah.
Okay, ain't no problem with that. Just differs.
All right, personnel and employment requirements.
What do y'all require now? Driver's license? Inability to get there.
No, actually, we do a background check.
Do you? Everybody does it, or just?
Well, I do.
We do, but I mean, it is a thing we just have started doing, but
How do y'all have to pay for those, and what's the cost?
I let the applicant pay for his.
Okay.
What about drug testing?
Yes. Yeah, we're just like any other business. We require E-Verify, I mean, we do all of those things. We're just like any other business. I don't really know that we can do a whole lot more. Conflict of interest statements, equal opportunity employment, for sure we're there. Staff payment limits and records.
What's conflict of interest? What would that entail?
That's the only thing we don't do. Everything else we got, background checks, driver's license check, social security card, E-Verified it.
Maybe the conflict of interest, would that be like, somebody selling something to the fire department that they're,
Yeah, I guess we couldn't have a vendor or salesperson on the fire department that we buy everything from, I guess is what that is.
Well, if it's like, probably the same vein as county conflict rules that, you know, you can't receive gifts from vendors, can't, you know, if you have a person in the decision-making chain on purchasing and procurement at a VFD, that person can't have a vested interest in the sale of the property or the purchase. You know, if I sell fire trucks, I can't be on the board and vote to buy a fire truck from myself. That's the example, or you can't take gifts. You know.
or if you
Fair
have,
amount of procurement rules are pretty stringent when it comes to taking gifts, personal gifts from vendors, and those kinds of things.
So much for the hats.
You have interest in a company, you would have that company doing business with the fire department.
There's usually a de minimis exception.
Actually,
Yeah.
You know,
You just can't get a new car.
interesting enough, in the state statute said there's not a de minimis
There's not
exception.
at all?
Not for government entities, and if they're following, if the rules are written the same way that the government entity rules are, the only rule that is generally if it's available to all the people in the group. It's like if you bring donuts, you have to put them in the break room, is kind of the soft point that the interpretation gets, but that's all the conflict, we're going back, that's all the conflict of interest statement would be.
I guess one difference here though is we're not a government entity.
Yeah, we're not a political subdivision, so we're not a government entity. So if we wanna get some donuts, we can.
speaking of donuts, might anybody bring any donuts?
And the
I think the general gist of having these things in the contract is good. I mean, I'm sure that most are doing it, but having it in the contract, I'm sure is everybody's doing the background checks and drug tests and those type of things.
I'm all for that. Most places, probably not bad for
Johnny, did I see a question on the staff payment limits and records, or was it?
Did I see a question?
No, I said, you're clear on that? We were clear on what that is, and
Yeah,
it's good with everybody?
I'm assuming, you know, that's just an hourly rate.
Understood.
Records on that.
Okay.
I'm assuming some are doing pre-employment physicals, I don't know if everybody's,
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody is.
that's not,
Well, I don't know.
theirs.
I wouldn't say anybody.
I don't know if we're doing employment physicals, we're doing, pulmonary function test, the requirement to wear a respirator, so.
There's some baseline things that, you know, just should be.
Okay.
Just one quick thing on the background checks, like if you have a firefighter that's had a background check and he goes to work helping you on his off days,
I don't trust that.
you don't trust that?
Yes, I do.
So you would accept that?
Yeah.
You
Yes.
If it's within a reasonable period of time, yeah.
Or they're still currently employed there, obviously, you know, they're on the watch list. So,
And can I ask a question on the staff payment limits and records?
Sure.
Is this to make sure too that everybody's paying the same hourly rate for those positions?
Should be. No, it shouldn't be, because each department's their own entity.
Well, you're gonna end up with a competition for the employment pool. And you're gonna drive those personnel costs.
I don't think that's something that needs to be in the county contract. I think that's something we work out amongst ourselves. You know, that's an agreement that we have with each other, and I think that can be left at that.
I think pretty much all of them are pretty, they may not be equal, but they're close.
Yeah.
Mm.
Could it result in the department paying the best gets the best firefighters?
I think the way they.
I mean, not that that's a negative.
It is business.
I mean, that's a good thing. Pay the most, you get the best.
But we pretty much have an agreement to how we do all that.
Jeff, do you have a comment on that, anything?
No, it varies pretty substantially across, based on call, based on hours, based on weekend per diems, based on you would think that they're a little more standardized than what they are, but it goes across even to what chiefs are paid, you know, across the entire spectrum. So I think the idea was to try to reach some standardization a little bit as to what the caps and those kinds of things would be, so you don't create, you know, a rampant kind of competition for employees at that point.
Well, each department's an individual contractor, so they can set their own pay scales, correct?
Should be able to.
It's like a business.
All right, procurement requirements.
I'll jump on that. I think we pretty much already do that. You know, most of us wear the same stuff, and we buy it on the Charlotte contract, or the Charlotte purchasing group. And as far as purchase by county under state contract, if I want to buy on a state contract, I can do it. I don't need to purchase under the county to do that. So we can purchase right off the state contract just like the county does. We can get our tires, and go buy a car, we can do that, or, you know, whatever. It comes right off the state contract price. That's what most of us are doing now, using the state contract price on all that stuff.
Municipalities operate similar.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same thing, same price. I don't know why we would purchase it under the county and have them give it to us.
I think the thought was on trucks in that specific instance, is that the county, we can do it several ways. The VFD can purchase the truck, inspect the truck, and we can.
On the state contract?
Well, I think that the idea was
You're,
not always off the state contract. It says state contract there, because Jeff was just trying to collect ideas. But you can order a truck, give us the invoice, we can pay the vendor
that's
directly.
on down.
You know, there's a number of payment options. And I think the thought was that for VFDs that don't have cash available to buy the truck, the county's gonna pay for the truck anyway, that we would pay for the truck and convey the truck back to the VFD, which is part of the agreement.
That's paper terms. We're talking about the procurement requirements.
Right, but we're gonna, if we have to pay for it, there are gonna be some standard, there's gonna be some requirements, that it's how it's procured. If it's off state contract, that's fine. If it's, you know, if it's off any kind of purchasing co-op, that's fine. You know, we just want, we'll be, I think the interest the county will have is to ensure that the best possible price is reached for that truck. I think that's kind of the only intent of that.
So that's outside of standardization, but I guess you can argue that the standardization gets you a little bit cheaper price, but.
So what he's talking about is it has to be bid three bids. and-
Right, I understand that. But the standardization doesn't drive the 3 bid requirement, or drive the invoicing.
But I think during the budget process, the discussion, you know, if someone wants to buy a ladder truck and they don't have any, you know, structures in their district that would require a ladder truck, then that's obviously gonna be part of the budget discussion. So there's gonna be some standardization as to what type of equipment. It goes at certain VFDs and some limitation on that. But I think that's all that can be worked out through the budget process each year with the requirements on the equipment side of it.
So I don't know that, it doesn't sound like you're in favor of the standardization of equipment within the contract, because I don't know that I would be necessarily.
I think it's up for discussion. I don't know if it has to be embedded or if it can, I mean, I think Jeff's envisioning annual addendums to the contract for the budget aspect of it, so that that's discussed on an annualized basis. But with a kind of a 5-year capital plan in the works, so. And I think what he was, the visualization kind of goes a little deeper too, because when we were looking at, for instance, at budget, when we were talking about bunker gear, all the VFDs had different pricing for bunker gear. We had some that would come in and it'd be what, like $2,200, $2,300 a set. Some would come in with $4,100, $4,200 a set for bunker gear. So some standardization as to what the county's going to pay per set of bunker gear for the VFD, I think is kind of part of where that came from. Jeff collected up a bunch of ideas and kind of tried to sketch them out. So I think that's where that discussion comes from.
We good? Okay, the budget process.
You're already doing the annual justification of expense, right?
Yeah. That's part of the budget process. Absolutely. Now, I need a little explanation of the development of 5-year capital plan by the county. I don't quite understand that statement.
Jeff, you want to elaborate on that? Would
I
that
think
be?
it's, kind of the thinking is having a long-term equipment plan, because in our discussions, pretty much any structure of funding you have, there's gonna have to be some long-term plan as far as equipment replacement. And understanding how all of those plans kind of hang together. Kind of like the needs analysis, I think that was done before my time here, but I think we've been working off of it as to when trucks are gonna be slotted for replacement, county, you know, across the county in all the districts, when new fire stations are gonna are gonna be needed, and those things. But I think having a 5-year capital plan helps you to plan, helps us to plan as far as how we set rates, whatever version of the funding structure that the commission decides on. But I think you have to have a 5-year kind of a capital plan. You just can't come up and, you know, decide a year in advance that you need to buy a truck, or during the budget process. That truck should be on the horizon of some kind in the planning process. So I think it's just really baking together a capital plan. Which, like I said, I think you guys already did that in the needs analysis at some point. I think refreshing that, kind of getting a handle on it, keeping it refreshed is probably key.
Yeah, I think the hang up for me is the by county.
Yeah.
You know, that's not the county's to design a capital plan, if that's what the intent was on it. Yeah, absolutely, I agree that there should be some financial planning, both from a budget or an annual expense budget and your capital, absolutely. I just think
But it should be done by the fire department.
yeah, not by the county.
Well, I think it's a cooperative process, because it's gonna need to slot in with the funding ability. So I think it's an agreed upon capital plan. I don't think it's one dictating to the other, so.
May not be, it just, so I would drop, I'm not in favor of the by county part, I guess is what I'm talking about. If it's development of a 5-year capital plan, that makes sense.
It's to ensure that the money's there to pay for the capital items
apparatus stations, breathing apparatus, all those type things, whenever they come time for replacement.
Yeah, understood, but again, developed
But
by the county.
cooperatively
Yeah,
developed,
it's
that's the concept.
got, well, actually, it's gotta be developed by the department, and then, in my opinion, then go to the county for the funding and look at long range. I see it reversed.
I think you have to start from the ground up. I think the departments have to put together their list, and then it kind of gets baked together.
Right.
So that all the lists come together, and at some convergence point, it has to be eventually, has to bake it together at some point. But yeah, I don't think the county's gonna sit down and say, you know, Chief Knupp needs this truck, and this truck, and this truck, and this is what his capital program's gonna be. I think we would look to you to tell us when your trucks are gonna need to be replaced.
Right. The words aren't saying that, that's all I want to bring to
Okay.
this.
That wasn't the intent, so.
Okay. Payment terms?
Didn't we discuss that just a few minutes ago?
I think this is, right now, the contracts specify that funding is paid out as it's received over the year. For some departments, there's a cash flow problem, as far as the county collects all the fees and taxes pretty much in a 4-month window. So, starting in probably October, November, December, January timeframe, and maybe a little bit into February, is when we collect all the fees and taxes. So departments, if we were paying it only as it comes in, some departments have trouble the rest of those months making cash flow, such that we've had to advance some departments. So we could, you know, depending upon the structure, depending upon the department, we could pay 1/12 of the appropriation, or we can, you know, there's a number of ways to do that. We're always gonna be limited or capped by the appropriation, because that's our limited legal authority to essentially pay out. But, I think payment terms are negotiable as far as the quarterly payments. Do you want it all at one time, 2 payments, all when it comes in? I think that that's the kind of payment terms, you know, any contract, because you can't have to have an exchange of, you know, consideration for contracts, have to have some kind of payment term. Is it every month, is it quarterly, however we wanna structure that. So I think that that's pretty much just the same in that part of it. We have to have some kind of payment term and some kind of agreement as to how we're gonna flow that money out.
How's it structured now?
For most VFDs, they get it as it comes in, up to the appropriation limit. So once the appropriation limit's hit, then that goes into a fund to be used in the future for fire service in that district.
Right now, and I think the problem occurred, it's always been paid out when it came in. I think where the problem started was when we went from $50 to $100 on the fire fee, because those fire departments that were getting that subsidy, increased amount of subsidy, were getting a check every month for that increased amount of subsidy. When you went from 50 to 100, it moved those fire fees to the end of the year. I think everybody's pretty well balanced that out now, got that straightened out.
Not everybody.
Okay.
We still cash advance some folks. What I'm saying is, from a county perspective, whatever the contract terms we need to negotiate to keep you solvent, keep VFDs solvent, because not all VFDs have large cash balances to be able to cash fund operations until they get replenishment. So we can make those terms available, you know, there's options, and we can look at it. It can be negotiated in 18 different versions of it. I would prefer not to do it that way, because it's kind of a headache, but we can do it that way.
All right, restrictions on use of funds.
Well, the first one, the first bullet point is a legal restriction based on the type of funding district it is. So, depending upon the final outcome of the funding decision, as far as mechanism, that'll play into that discussion. I think the other piece, which all kind of wraps up together, is there's some, based on commission's, I won't say direction, but based on some questions and direction we've received from the commission, there's been interest in, similar to how we fund schools by purpose and function, to ensure that money provided for personnel stays in this funding personnel, and money that provided for equipment stays in funds equipment versus being shifted up to fund personnel. So I think that, at least what that's referring to is ensuring that as we fund line items or functions within the budget based on that justification, that the money is spent for what the county has provided the money for within those contracts. So if we fund personnel, that personnel gets funded, and that money stays with personnel, doesn't buy additional equipment, or vice versa. Money for equipment doesn't go buy personnel.
The challenge I see with that approach is, and you referred to the schools, I'll use that as an example. If we get in, my concern of limiting that and us not having the ability to move around into different categories, as you get into, they allotted $1,000 for paper. They only needed $50 worth of paper, but by golly, they're gonna spend $1,000 in paper because that was what was in the budget, they're afraid of not getting it. I don't know that, I mean, there's balances of all this, I understand that, but, you know, I kind of just go back to my analogy, whenever the cleaning crew, you know, my cleaning crew analogy, do you tell them that they can only spend $1,000 on their employees and $50 on the buffers? A little different here, I understand, and I'm sensitive to that as well. But you're contracting for a service if, and to the argument that you would counter-propose, if I could do it for $1,000 and I provide that $1,000 and I have to do it for less, then I should be able to use the funding for whatever. Obviously not going on a vacation, things of that nature, you don't get ridiculous, don't get me wrong, but I'm concerned about tying the hands of an independent organization.
And the way that that's handled, normally through other contracts that have that type of provision, or even with their own departments, is they can process or request the manager has authorization to transfer funds or allow that transfer of funds. So I think that's some of the discussion is, it could be by category, it doesn't have to be by line item, it can be by category. So it can be personnel, operating, capital, debt. There's different levels you can do it at, but there is some interest been expressed by commission in having some assurance through the contract that that funding stays within kind of the expenditure category that it's been given for. And the reason that is if you give money for capital, for instance, and that's moved up to personnel, that personnel creates an ongoing commitment to fund from the county, in most cases, or an increased tax rate in the district. So if you add, let's say 5 firefighters aren't authorized through the year, but you say instead of capital, you move that up and hire 5 firefighters, the following year, the discussion becomes, well, do you want to lay off 5 firefighters, or are you going to raise the rate sufficient to cover those? Because the capital is generally a one-time purchase. So I think that's kind of the interest, is ensuring that there's some protection against having that happen. I don't think it's the intent to tie the hands of the VFD from operating. It's to ensure there's some protections against growing costs mid-year without the approval of the county, particularly in a long-term situation when you have personnel.
Is there a problem somewhere in the county now with that?
We've had it multiple times where additional staffing wasn't authorized through the budget, but added mid-year, and then at the next budget cycle, you have additional staffing that you have to contend with and fund, when the only option then is, if you don't fund it, is to lay off firefighters. And nobody wants to be put in a position to be laying off firefighters. It's just not a popular position.
All right, so the county's gonna take over telling fire departments how they need to fight their fires. That's what you're telling me.
No, I think
Yes, it's what you're telling me.
what we're telling you is your budget that you propose at the beginning of the year,
It may change in mid-year.
and there's mechanisms for amending it. You can create a mechanism, you do it all the time.
The county is coming in here and telling me, yeah, I'm gonna tell you how to run the fire department. That's the way y'all want it, huh? That's the way the county wants it, fine.
Well, I don't think the county at this point wants it any specific way. I think we're trying to work through those issues with this process.
We get a budget approved every year through a long, drawn-out process. And then that money needs to go to the fire department. The fire department should have control over where that money goes. If a fire department is more volunteer than they are paid, and something happens in mid-year and they have to hire more people to maintain their 4 firefighters on a structure fire, I don't see where the county should get involved in that. If you're getting involved in it, then you're telling me how to run my fire department. Now, these other chiefs can probably tell me I'm crazy, but I'll be fine.
I certainly see your point. And I see, from experience, see Jeff's point from the standpoint.
I think
If it's egregious, I mean, I don't wanna put myself in a spot here because we're talking about firefighting, not other areas of funding, but
I think one of the things that we're all forgetting is that every one of the departments has a board of directors that takes care of stuff like this. You know, me as a chief, I can't spend a penny without their approval. So it's not just one person gonna do stuff like that. If that's gonna happen, it's gonna be a governmental decision from the fire department.
Are all departments set up that way though, with a check and balance for their board?
I think where we come in on this is that because we would have to set the tax rate, like we would set your tax rate every year. You know, what Jeff is saying is that if you hire that person mid-year and nobody planned it, then next year you're either gonna have to tell that person, we're either gonna have to raise your tax rate, you're gonna have to find additional savings, or something's gonna have or gonna lay them off. It's kind of like, it's in a situation like with the school system, where they say, you know, they might say, well, you cut our funding, so we had to cut teachers or assistants. Well, we may have given them more funding, they just used it for something else. And you know, not that, you know, it's just, what are we planning for? What are we gonna do? Because we're gonna be the ones that, the county commissioner will be the one that gets the blame if we start laying off firefighters in your district, because we don't raise the taxes in order to get there. I mean, because, I mean, what would be to keep you, if you had a truck, for example, and you went and hired 3 or 4 and you didn't buy that truck, you know, that one-time expense versus the ongoing expense of 4 firefighters could be huge on your tax rate.
What it smacks us in the face of, let me just cut to the chase on this. What it smacks me in the face of is that the county is saying that I don't trust you enough to know that.
No, it's a checks and balances system.
I understand that.
It's not a trust or a lack of faith.
But
it is.
Finish.
So the point here is it does. Perception is reality. So let's start right there. So my perception is that the trust isn't there, that we make that adjustment mid-year to hire these 4 people just on a whim. That's what it appears like the county is saying that you're making this adjustment mid-year because you want to. We're trying to pull the wool over your eyes to get money from the county to then go do what we want to. And I think where it hits wrong is me as a fire chief and my board of directors aren't going to arbitrarily put people on. It could be that when we asked for the funding the previous year, the budgeting process was saying no. However, I know that I'm getting down to 2 people during the day, and about a matter of fact, one of those is getting ready to go out on a heart transplant. Now I'm down to 1 person today that I can count on. What am I going to do with the other 3 if they don't show up? Then I'm going to get into a point that I'm now going on probation, and then it snowballs. So whatever we're doing here, we've got to be sensitive to this perception.
And I think that perception shows a lack of trust in the county, which may be there, but it's not. I'm not going to let Unionville go without a firefighter, and I'm not going to, just as I'm not going to let a school go without running water. You know, we're going to, you know, you come to the board. In the school system, for example, if they had taxing authority, they wouldn't have no need to come to us at all. If the firefighters had taxing authority and you raised your own tax rate, you just set it and everything else, then there would be no need to have these discussions. But we have to set the tax rate, and we have to give you money from the tax dollar, so we have to be accountable for those. And it's not that I don't trust you. I trust Johnny, I trust you, I trust Don, I trust all, you know, I don't have any problem with trust. It's just why would you not think that we would fund something that you absolutely needed? And that would be a lack of trust toward us. So we're working together. And in order to work together, we have to trust each other. And that's both ways. You have to trust us to do what's right.
I agree.
We have to trust you to do what's right. And we do trust you to do what's right. If you came to me and said, I need 2 people, I've got to have them, I would have no problem appropriating that money if that's what you need. And I don't think Jerry would have a problem. I don't think that any of the other commissioners would have a problem if that's what you needed. And what he's saying, just like the school system, they come, let's say with roofing, they come and they say, well, we saved $100,000 on the roof. Let's move it to another school. Okay, let's do that. And there's no really argument over moving those monies, just like the $1,000 for paper or whatever. You know, it really, it's not micromanaging, it is making sure that that money, if it's one-time money, stays in one-time money land. If it's ongoing expense and you're using one-time money to provide an ongoing expense, then we're gonna have to adjust your rate possibly. So that's what we have to look at. And the amount, if it's $1,000, that's one thing. If it's $20,000, it's another thing.
Johnny has a comment.
One thing I wanna say is we're not the school system.
Right, and you don't have tax
We're not
authority.
the school system. Second thing is, you know, it's, how many times have you had to adjust tax rates? I mean, in the last, Jerry, in your term, how many times have you adjusted fire department tax rates? Probably not many, right? Not many. So I mean, it's not that the tax rate's doing this, you know, and I think that's the perception that we're living with, is that you're saying, well, you're gonna come to me and I'm gonna have to raise the tax rate, or, you know, and I'm gonna have to raise your tax rate, is what you're saying to me. So the reality of that is if Kerry gets upset about that, he's gonna come to me. And I know this from experience. He's gonna come to me. He's not gonna come to you, because it says on his tax bill, for transparency reasons, fire tax. Henry Bridge Fire Department fire tax is what it says on their tax bill. So they don't go to Union County, he looks down there and says, man, that fire department's charging me whatever. He comes over there. And I think that's the difference is, we talk about transparency and, you know, wanting to break out everything on the tax bill so everybody can see where their money goes. Mine's been that way since 1984.
Well, see, you're in one situation,
Okay,
but Bill, you get 40% of yours comes from the county general fund or fire fleet? Well, what's the percentage that you get from the county general fund, which we do go up on the tax rate? We did last year.
That wasn't a major fire department, so.
It's part of the general tax rate.
Okay. I was wanting to try to get through as much of this as we can. I know we're down to like 10 minutes. And I don't know what the answer to that is other than to say, let's put something together.
I was just gonna say that the volunteer fire departments have served us well in the past, and the whole purpose in this group meeting together is to create a sustainable funding mechanism that does the same in the future. I've made a star beside this. It's a little bit of a contentious point, but there's certainly a middle ground, and I think we'll work to find that through the process.
What I'd like to ask, and I don't know, Jim, that's the reason I asked if you've had that problem. But if a budget comes out and fire department has a certain budget to go by, why would he need to raise his budget halfway through the year in excess of an emergency?
I think what's more common is if the commission denies an increased cost, some of the VFDs at times have added those costs anyway. So for instance, they would come and propose during the budget process additional staffing. The county makes the determination, the board makes the determination they don't want to add that funding for that staffing at that time. They get midway through the year and add that staffing anyway. And then when you get to the next budget year, there's additional firefighters that weren't authorized, or additional staffing not authorized in the prior year. You know, and I think in any contract, you can't have a contract but just saying we're going to trust each other. I don't think it's a trust issue. I think contract makes just good service, good service agreements as to what's expected, both on the VFD side and both on the county side. And just because it's in the contract doesn't mean there's no trust. The contract's just to define the relationship.
Well, each fire department should have enough operating equity on hand that if he needs them, unless it's a dire, big emergency, to take care of a minor emergency. So I don't see where there would be, why he would need a great big increase halfway through the year. If he already planned his budget, and if he goes by his plan, why would he need that big increase? Or why would he wait till the next budget cycle and put it in it?
I think you just have to, I think in the contracts you have to create a mechanism to allow it. I mean, I don't have a good answer to that question, that'd be, but I think Stanley's exactly right. I think that we've created mechanisms in the past to allow amendments and money to be moved around. And if there's a real need, the commission meets every other week. Those needs get brought back before the commission all the time in different forms. So, I think creating a good process for amending those budgets solves the problem either way. And as fast as you can get the request down here, we can put it on an agenda. And we've even had items walked on the same day in some cases. So I think that there's some process that just has to be thought out through that. So I think Commissioner Simpson's right. That's one of those things we have to look out.
Okay. Next item, volunteer fire department financial requirements.
And that reflects into the previous one, could be.
Yeah, because us, unlike y'all, we have a CIP plan, or it's not a fund balance, but we have a planned capital purchase plan that we have money that's earmarked for, same way that you guys do. It just may be a multi-year thing before we do it. So the maximum fund balance, I'm curious about that.
Agreed, I shouldn't have a $10 million sitting back in savings and asking for more from the county, absolutely not.
But that money's
But
usually earmarked.
if that money's earmarked to buy a ladder truck, and use a realistic term, $1 million, if you're looking to build, then that would make sense.
Understood. Maybe you would call that,
Unrestricted.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the term would be. If you have financial statements, it would be unrestricted, because if you're gonna commit it, if you're gonna do it for a reserve for a capital item, and we'll be aware of that. I think that's the issue is, as long as we understand that's what you're doing, I don't think, there's clear communication of that. I don't see there being an issue with having that. This is mirrored off kind of what the EMS contract is, that there's a sweet spot somewhere where your rates and everything are set at their appropriate level such that you're not building a huge balance and providing for the capital needed, or that we're setting them so low that you have no balance. So that's kind of how the EMS contract is structured with, I think, a $500,000 minimum, where it's beyond that point, the commissioners in the EMS can decide how that money then gets spent or distributed after that fact. So I think something similar to that was the thinking, was that there's going to be some agreement on what the cap will be, or the bottom end of that will be.
So the clarification on that fund balance, are you talking about that we have on hand or that you have on hand?
I'm talking about that you have on hand.
Okay. And realize that that's a cash flow too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And the difference between us and EMS is those EMS is getting paid for a service they're rendering, we don't. So that'll be a little bit of differentiation there as well. We'll have to take into consideration.
Well, but we struck a check to EMS every month for their service.
Yeah, but they get a check every month from their collection agency,
And that's part of the payment terms. I mean, I think that's, the only point being is that there's not an exponent, $10 million.
$10 million, right, that's what they were gonna get to agree.
But also not zero, for cash flow purposes. I don't want anybody coming to our door and saying, we can't operate as a VFD because you didn't give us enough money to keep our doors open and the water running.
Okay, audit requirements and county auditing.
what are we doing now?
Well, I think our recent auditors had asked that all the VFDs provide their most recent financial statements. So what we found is that there's not consistency across the county as far as audits and information. So what we're thinking about at this point, and haven't finalized obviously, is that the county would fund basically financial audits, annual audits, just like we fund for ourselves, whether it's all of them or a portion each year, some form of version of that. Right now the contracts authorize the county to be able to, with notice, look at all records and information. So this would just be a continuation of that. It's no different than how we have a relationship with EMS or a relationship with any of our community service providers. whether it's Red Cross or any of those, they're to provide on request an audit. But in this case, what we'd say is the county provides some funding, because have heard that it's cost prohibitive in some cases, but we're dealing with such a large amount of tax dollars, we feel it's necessary to have some financial audit and some financial audit capability in the contract. Not funded by the VFD, but funded by the county to be able to go and do those audits.
Okay, we may run slightly over the temperature of 75 degrees or 9 o'clock. But we're gonna try to get through this list. Requirements for public meetings.
I did that already, don't
We do that already?
Yeah, I'm not sure what, that's part of our bylaws.
Yeah.
So that probably would need to be in the contract, that's in every one of those bylaws, how that has to go down. Or, yeah, bylaws.
This,
You have to have at least one
as
of
Jeff
those.
said, this is everything but the kitchen sink on the list, so there'll be some that'll drop off. Contingency for fire department dissolution.
And this kind of goes
I
back to what we were
I
talking about.
think we've already talked about that.
Yeah.
Insurance.
Yeah, we got a bunch of it. What
Is that standard or something with regard to what you have to carry or in terms of liability, all
I
that kind
think
of
the liability part of it may be vary between departments, but,
Yeah, that's something that probably needs to be in there.
yeah, it probably needs to be in there so that everybody will have at least a minimum.
Yeah, I think Jeff will tell you that there's some things in the contract that are not negotiable. Having some form of insurance requirement,
Everything's negotiable, yeah.
well, for the county. Let's put it this way, identification, severability, those things are gonna be in contracts in any form the county does. So, this is kind of getting to that template language that Jeff would put in every contract.
Okay, indemnification of county.
It's in the contract we got now.
Okay.
That's for more people, we don't know.
Yeah.
I assume the same as compliance of with all state, with all applicable laws.
I think it's in there.
You wanna jump in on that?
Is that not in there? It's the-
Well, they should be, if you're gonna do it, as applying to volunteer fire departments, put that in there.
Yeah.
As applies to volunteer fire department.
Because they're different.
True volunteers are, yes.
Okay, county remedies for non-compliance.
What does that, I understand it, the words, but what do we mean by that? We'll give us some background there.
I think it's that cure period, if you're not meeting whatever standards we've agreed to, that there's some format of how to resolve that issue. At least that's how it's structured in the EMS contract, is if performance standards aren't being met, then there's a kind of a period of time to ensure that those standards are being met.
So that needs to go both ways, rather than just county remedies, that should be
Yeah,
remedies
if we-
period.
If we're not funding you,
Well-
then you have contractual.
But you're also
Obligations.
running the software that we report, you're
Right.
also running dispatching, so that's why it goes both ways, not just, counties' expected remedies, it should be our expected remedies of counties.
Right.
And it runs both ways in the EMS contract.
Yeah.
Term. Jeff threw it out, 5 years, 3 to 5 years. EMS was 3, 5 years. That can be discussed. Termination.
What is it, 30 days now? I think it should be a lot more than 30 days because fire service is too
Complicated.
integral to, our public safety. And I think to have 30-day notices is, I don't think serves the taxpayers well, citizens well.
Okay. And template of legal terms. Is James Allen, you wanna explain all those to us?
I mean, you're talking about assignment here, you can assign the contract to, I mean, that should require county approval if somebody's wanting to. I mean, the county's not gonna assign it to anybody else unless we get taken over. I don't see that happening, but the county should certainly have some say in who they want to contract with. Amendment should require, be in writing, require both sides. Severability, that's just say if there's one provision in here that doesn't, that gets found illegal or unenforceable or anything else, that it can kick out and the rest of the contract stays in place. Choice of law is obviously gonna be North Carolina law. Venue, I mean, might as well have it heard Union County, that's all we're talking about, right? Independent contractor, now we're getting into something. We'll have to discuss all those things. You know, waiver of defaults, just say if there's a default, and they waive it, that doesn't mean they can hold it against you in the future. You know, you can't say, oh, well, you let me do this before. Well, if they start enforcing it and give you that period of cure and do it just because they let you go in the past, doesn't mean that works. And that goes both ways. Notice, we do need some notice requirements. Third-party beneficiaries is important in this. We want to make sure there aren't third-party beneficiaries. So if you contract with the supplier to supply something to you and the county terminates your contract, that supplier can't come sue the county and say, hey, we were dependent on that contract y'all had. No, you can't do that. That concise enough?
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we'll be back and explore this again. I appreciate your patience, and we almost made it by 9, it's 1 minute after, but I believe if everyone's in consensus, our next meeting will be with regard to the staffing requirements that the Chief Association and the Fire Commission have been working on. So any further questions, comment, discussion? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much.